You're watching the Pregame Show Network. This is the Big Boys. I'm Tolly Carr in Atlanta. We got your favorite faces all across the country. Neely just touched on Rob Livingston, the new defensive coordinator. He comes over from the Bengals. Carl, I haven't talked to you in so long. There's so many opinions I want to catch up with you on. Your thoughts on Livingston coming in as the new defensive coordinator and what he brings to the table.
When the defensive coordinator job opened up, Coach Prime was adamant that he wanted somebody from the National Football League. He wanted to play an NFL style of defense. He wanted to be able to match up. NFL coaches understand about positional match and schematic match. What I mean by that is when you're playing Kansas State, they're going to run power O. They're going to play with an H-back and a tight end. They're going to run downhill gap scheme run, and you have to be able to match for that. When you play Oklahoma State, they're going to play with 4 and 5 wide receivers, so you have to lighten the box and play with 5 and 6 and sometimes even 7 DBs, and you have to be able to match with that. Sometimes college coaches get real caught up into a system of play, and that system doesn't always translate for week to week. But NFL guys that come from an NFL background, they really understand that you have to be able to do a variety of things to match and mirror offenses. So he was adamant, and his guys were calling, trying to get involved with the job, trying to interview, and he was giving names. He was adamant he did not want a college guy. He wanted a guy with an NFL background. Coach Livingstone, when he came from the Bengals, he had an excellent interview. His presentation was tight. His drills was tight. He had a full plan on how he was going to install it, how he was going to teach it, how he was going to prepare his position coach to be able to install it and teach it as well. He had a really, really impressive production when he came in. And I think that what he showed in the interview carried over into the spring, and they have a lot of continuity now and really good chemistry as a staff on the defensive side of the ball.
Neely, you've seen it. You've seen the juxtaposition of different styles of coaching. Since Livingston has come in, can you feel a different cadence, a different tempo, terminology? Like what are some of the tangible things you can tell since he's arrived, Neely?
But one thing you can tell is that he just gets it. He understands, coaching at this level. He knows what it takes to get to the next level because he was not only coaching the secondary, the Bengals, he was a scout before that and going out there and acquiring talent. One of the things I love about what Coach Livingston has brought to the table is he's not just so hell-bent on his defensive philosophy and his scheme, and you got to master this. What he came in and did was evaluated the talent that was here to learn what these guys are good at, what they excel at, and let's craft a defense around getting our best 11 on the field situationally and let them do what they do well. Even when it comes to terminology, Coach Carl Reed, he was sitting in the room with the defense and said, hey, what word do y'all want to call it? It's easier for one guy, me, to learn y'all's word instead of 15 people trying to learn what I want to call. So he's a participatory coach. He wants to develop the talent, identify what these guys bring to the table. And as Coach Reed was just saying, when it comes to being able to scheme from week to week, what you're going to see on this defense is there's going to be a starter week 1 and week 2 that may not start week 3 and week 4. And it's not because they're not performing. It's because these guys are NFL minded and they put the best people on the field for that particular day. And that's going to change week to week. So you're going to get a lot of guys with an opportunity to show what they can do.
Carl, let me ask you this. Neely just said something interesting. And as we look at the changing dynamics of college football, players are more empowered now than they've ever been because of the ability to, earn money, NIL, everybody's, valuation, now you can look at it as a monetary value. There is power and leverage that players didn't have before. So when Neely just gave the example, it's a small thing, but it got me to thinking. He comes in and says, hey, what do you guys want to call it? The NFL culture, coaches know, look, I can't boss these guys around and make them run sprints and show them I'm the boss. They have to work together collectively. Do you think that's a part of the changing face of college football, that coaches are going to have to adapt that, hey, we're working together, as opposed to that old school, I'm the boss, you do whatever I tell you to do whenever I tell you to do it?
Well, it's a balancing act because there still has to be some order and guys have to listen to direction. So you can't totally go to substitute teacher role. But one of the biggest changes today, and people talk about money and then transfer portal, the major change is a kid's ability to leave without needing his parents' permission, without having to call anybody. Back in the day, you had to sit a year if you transferred, but most importantly, you also had to call home and talk to somebody. You had to talk to your mom, you had to talk to your dad. There was a several step process of things that needed to be signed off on and a lot of communication for you to be able to move. And in that era of life, most of the time, your mom, your dad, they just told you that you needed to tough it out and you needed to persevere through it and deal with it because that's the way life was then. Now a kid can go in the portal and his parents don't even have to know. He doesn't need anybody's permission. He doesn't have to talk to any coaches if he chooses not to. So that to me is what the biggest change is in roster management right now.
And Neely, no matter what the change is, one of the things that Deion Sanders has always sold, and it is true, is that he understands football at all levels, and he understands, what it's like to be a college player, a high school player coming in, a guy who's, destined to go pro. But it's an interesting line, Neely, because, his standard is the standard. He doesn't change because things change around him, but at the same time, he's flexible, which almost makes him, in that regard, such a unicorn in coaching because he can determine which way he wants to go, but he's capable of doing it anyway.
Yeah, and I think Brother Reed there is spot on about the balance that you have to strike in college football or just across the board. It can't be my way or the highway anymore because you have to factor in that you have to re-recruit your own players each year if they're players that you want to keep. And if they're players that are going to be sought after, people are going to come after them. It's just the nature of the beast in this universe. Having said that, if there's any guy that could take that line and tiptoe it toward the old school way, it is Coach Prime. The standard is the standard. It is his way or the highway. But the reason he can pull that off, Tolly and Coach Reed, is that he starts off by identifying players that love the game, that want to play on Sundays, that want to change their lives, that want to become professionals on and off the field, whether that's the NFL or not. And with that carrot on the stick, they're quick to adjust to what he's saying and these coaches are coaching because one, fundamentally, you're learning from a guy who's been there, done that. And that ties into what you just spoke on, Tolly. You have a head coach at Colorado unlike any other in college football. One, he has a gold jacket from the Pro Football Hall of Fame. Two, he was a highly sought after recruit and he knows what it's like to be recruited. He has also been the parent of two players who were highly sought after recruits. So he knows what it's like to have coaches in schools approach your children. And two, he's been a coach at multiple levels in championships at all those levels. So he knows what it takes to coach and win. You put all that together, add in collectives, NIL, endorsement money, commercials, marketing, branding. What better guy right now for all this perfect storm of what is the new era in college football than what Coach Prime brings to the table? With all that, it allows him to push a little harder than some would, to not be able to have to negotiate the standard being the standard that someone may have to do to keep a player because he has a big carrot on the end of the stick. And if you reach that carrot, you're going to be playing on Sundays.
Absolutely. This is The Big Boys. You're watching the Pregame Show Network. Carl, let's talk about the offensive line. All right, you got some new faces in there. Everybody's loving what it looks like on paper, but they have to mesh. They have to gel. They have to work together as a fist as opposed to five fingers. What is that process like of getting your personnel, but then getting them to gel and perform as a unit?
It's a lot easier to get talented guys to jail than it is to get guys who don't have talent to jail because they can actually do the things that are necessary to be a good offensive lineman from communication, from run blocking to pass blocking, being able to block inside zone and outside zone stretch plays, being able to do the power O and the GT counter, the gap schemes, being able to do big on big protection, 4-man slide, 3-man slide, whether you have 50s or 60s, if the back is in, the back is out. You can do all of those things when you have a talented group of offensive linemen playing, led by a new offensive line coach and Coach Lockhart, who has the ability and the experience of playing in the National Football League himself. You got guys this year that came in that have a lot of experience as starters. And don't forget, we talk about transfers a lot. You got the best high school one in the country, too, in Jordan Seaton. And so I'm really excited about the development of this group. But when people talk about offensive line play, They talk about playing as one, they talk about chemistry, but in order to do that, you need 5 guys that are not limited physically. And these guys have no physical limitations. And that's going to allow the coaches to really push them to play at the level they need them to play at.
Neely, what have you been seeing from the real big boys with those offensive linemen as they continue to gel together?
I love what Coach Reed just articulated, man. It is just that simple. I think it was Coach Saban in Alabama that said, mediocre people don't like highly driven people. And when you got some guys in the room that are, not giving it their all, and you got to mix in with guys who can, that room is not going to gel well. What you have here in Colorado, juxtaposed to what you had last year in offensive line, you've got a cadre of guys who can get the job done. You got a room of guys who believe they can be the one and should be the one, and they compete and push each other. When you look at what Jordan Seaton is bringing to the table, as Coach Reed talked about, top pick in the nation coming in here. You look at Khalil Benson transferring in, and don't forget about guys like Tyler Brown who now get to play this year, and he gets to help Jordan Seaton grow and develop because they're going to be right there on that left side together. This line is extremely better than it was last year from a talented standpoint from the individual players. But what Coach Phil Lodeholt brings to the table with his playing days in Minnesota, high draft pick, has coached at Oklahoma and Ole Miss. Don't sleep on this new offensive line coach and what he can do to get these guys ready, because as Coach Reed said, now you got talent. You have physical gifts that can match what you're trying to do schematically. Sometimes you're trying to get a guy to pull one way or do something, and he just physically can't do it from a talent standpoint, from a dexterity standpoint, from a flexibility standpoint. These guys can bend, they can dip, they can move. They're the strongest guys in the weight room, which was not the case last year. They're pushing people around. They're big boys. This offensive line has a motto of DT2, don't touch two. They're going to make sure that Shedeur Sanders is nowhere near leading the nation in being sacked.